How many of you have ever done any systematic, disciplined interviewing? Come on, excuse me. Systematic, disciplined interviewing for any purpose. Somebody says we need to have you do some interviewing, and you went out and did some interviewing. Let me see your hand. Okay, second question. How many of you have ever done any systematic, deliberate, planned observation in any kind of a social setting where you were an observer and a product of your work was some kind of a report on what you were observing? So, now, that would give you some index as to what I'm up against in this course. Because that's a disastrous score, considering that those are two of the craft skills that are the most essential for most people in research and educational research conditions. And by your own confession or failure to announce your presence, you don't have much background, much experience. You're going to have a 2.5-week experience here that will give you a chance to remedy that to some extent. It'll provide foundations, it'll provide a frame of reference, it'll provide some theory. And then somewhere between now and the time you come up against dissertation or any other kind of systematic field work, you're going to have to do a lot of practicing. Right? So we'll try to lay the foundation. How many of you are planning to write a dissertation? Okay, that looks like pretty much all of you. How many of you assume that you'll be able to do it and do it competently this year? Oh, wait.
What happened eventually?
All right, let me make a recommendation. Those of you who didn't have your hand up right then, drop out. Drop out. If you can't see yourself becoming competent to do it, drop out. No use in wasting money. No use in wasting money. My time, your time, and money. It's just not fair. And it'll make our class smaller. Which has other advantages too. Now, am I serious? Yes. That's the worst part about it. You absolutely must presume that when you do your dissertation research, you're going to do it competently. If you can't make that assumption now, you really are in the wrong place. Now, that puts a little different spin on the question. What you were careful not to do is raise your hand and get me to tease me into asking you what you thought that meant, given that you don't have any experience. I know what you were up to. You were trying to protect yourself. Well, this is a bad time to protect yourself. It's a great time for exposure, a great time for honesty. How many of you know you're going to have to work hard in order to become competent in interviewing and in observation? Now, there is a good sign. Finally, we're getting some indications here that people are serious. That is a very important thing to come to. Okay? Now, I'm not trying to be cute, and I'm not trying to scare you off. I'm just trying to be honest with you. Seriously, in social research, where do you think you get your data? Books! Right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Where do you get your data? From people. What they're doing, what they're saying, what they're thinking, what they're claiming, what they're into, what they're afraid of, all of that from people. Now, you are a historian, let's assume, and you are going to get a PhD in history. Where do you get your data? 90% data you get for historical research comes out of writings of some sort that have already been done, either books or other kinds of documents, right? How many of you are going to do a PhD in history? Let me see your hands. theology, you're going to rewrite something that's already been written many, many, many times, but you're going to do a new spin on it, right? Where are you going to get your data? Seriously, where do you get your data? Literature, one sort or another, basically books. Is there anything wrong with doing research with books as the basis? That's a trick question. Watch the answer. Is there anything wrong with doing research with books as the basis for your data? How many of you see the trick in the question?
Depends on the research.
Depends on the purpose of the research. Right? Now, if the research's purpose is going to be satisfied by material from books, what does it tell you about the purpose of the research? It's going to be backward-looking to some extent. It may be, to be charitable about it, a linkage or a searching for a linkage between a backward look and a forward look. That's not bad. That's not wrong. But it's not true of a high percentage of the dissertations done in history and theology and a lot of other fields. You're going to get a PhD in English. What will be your literature base? You're going to do a PhD in English. Now, catch you on here. In the field of English, what will be your literature base?
English literature.
Published literature in English. Now, when you study published literature in English, which way are you looking? Back or front?
Back.
You're looking back. Now, this is why many people presume that research is inherently a backward look. Because for many fields, including fields represented in this institution, it is. But not in the field of social science. Any field related to or built on the rudiments of social science are looking at people and, among other things, looking at the people in the contemporary. Now, you may be looking at what made them the way they are, what they're trying to deal with from their own past or from their own history. But as an educator and as a missionary, you do not go to Zambia to study dead people. Now, do any of you remember the movie The Dead Poets Society? What was the title suggesting? The Dead Poets Society. What was just the idea of the title? What's that communicate? Did you ever see the movie?
Yeah, the past literature is dead, or the authors are dead, so...
But it wasn't relevant to today.
Yeah.
The study of that field, which was the study of English literature, in effect, studies, please, 2 words, dead poets. Great poetry was written by dead poets. Deadness doesn't make the poetry bad, but it does suggest that it isn't today, unless someone was, way, way out in front. Do you have anything against looking back? No. A foundation in history is valuable. How did we get to where we are today? As an educator, do you need to have a knowledge of history? Yes, absolutely. Is it possible to do a decent dissertation, which is an educational history dissertation? It's a yes or no question, and I don't think it's a trick question. What's your answer?
Yes.
I think so. What is the probability that a majority of our dissertations will be educational history dissertations? Probability is very low. Why? 2 reasons.
contemporary, you have to deal with the contemporary issues.
Most of us are going to be more motivated by concerns that are present and anticipatory, just ahead, than we will be motivated by a backward look. That's reason one. What's reason two? The field of education and the field of missions are both activist fields that are grounded in things that are in some cases backward looking, for example, theology, and grounded in history, yes. But the research that we do in those fields generally is research to facilitate change. And the key word is change. How are we doing? Again, any research looks at information we call a database. Any research builds from a database. What databases in general are there? Name one.
Are you looking for something specifically in education, or just
I
in
didn't
general?
specify it to that. What databases are there?
Historical archives.
Various kinds of archival accumulations of information, some of which is organized into publications and some of which is not. But the key word there is archive. Now, what does archive suggest? Accumulated, saved, stored from the past. There are databases there. Now, every field that I can think of right now does have some kinds of research that draw upon archival databases. Let me just give you an example. An activist field in the natural sciences is the field of clinical medicine. People in clinical medicine, medical practice, are concerned about, like we said a minute ago, your word, change. But they will ignore the archives that tell them something about the patterns in the past that would enlighten change. And there's at least one field within the specializations of medical practice, medical experience, and medical history, one field that draws extensively from archival material. Do you know what that field is? Muriel knows. Public health. Public health draws extensively from archival and statistical, demographic, contemporary kinds of evidence. Now, where is the incidence of this thing? What is the pattern in the last 20 years? Is it growing or not growing? Is incidence of tuberculosis receding or ascending? How many dissertations in the fields of medical education are primarily historical? High percentage, low percentage? Low percentage. But it's vital. All right, archival stuff is a body of literature that you would call a database. What's another database? Oh, come on, there's several. What's another database?
Journals?
Okay, let's just go to journals. Professional, published, and juried. Because professional journals are usually juried. What does juried mean?
They have to be assessed by a body.
Right, any article that goes in has to be reviewed by an appointed group or an elected group that is screening articles for that journal. So that some tomfool thing that comes along that is kind of absurd is discouraged from the journal. A truly professional journal, and if you don't understand this, you'll have a hard time figuring out how you get promoted in a major university, but you don't get promoted by writing articles for Moody Monthly. Because Moody Monthly will publish anything that the editors think is a good article. Now, editors of Moody Monthly are not stupid, but neither are they a professional jury. But the JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, has a jury of people that look at every manuscript. And if the article is sound, if its research is careful, if its methodologies are good, then it will be screened into the journal. So a professional journal is a kind of database. The accumulation of the professional journals in a field is a database. Now, how would you rate professional journals over against the literature of that field in general? Is it generally a better database or not as good database?
It depends what you're looking for, because the journal's usually relative to that jury that represents that sort of perspective. So it could be kind of narrow. If you're looking at a broad range of books, you might, and the journal's going to be more contemporary, but
So what's your answer?
mixed.
Wrong.
If you're looking for something specific, if you're looking for a perspective,
Yeah, you're wrong.
critique, it's much better.
You're just plain wrong. You're just plain wrong. Because it doesn't follow that literature gets of higher quality by avoiding scrutiny of scholarship. It doesn't get better, it gets worse. And the farther you get from that center core, the more corrupt it becomes. Now, does it have value? Yes, and that's your point. I think that there is a value of breadth. But my question wasn't that. I asked, is it a better database? The answer is no. It's not a better database simply because you're getting outside the jury journals, which is one reason why when we're looking at a bibliography, why we're working on grounding research in literature, the journals that are jury journals in every field are the core. Lots of other stuff gets in there. Now, it doesn't follow that books are even good. There are books and then there are books. Most books in the professional fields that are vying for competency and vying for attention will be reviewed, in fact, by the jury journals. So that literature gets also tabbed by the juried journals. J-U-R-I-E-D, jury. Jury becomes a verb in this sense. You jury something. And it's a funny use of the word, but it's a legitimate use of the word. Okay? So I think the answer is that the general literature of the field has value, but it is not better than. Furthermore, as we go along, the jury journals become even more critical because the proliferation of literature is so huge. Now, many fields don't have enough journals, so they only track out certain little specializations. But that's not true of most of the fields that are represented here. There are lots of good journals, jury journals, in the anthropological, ethnological fields. There are good jury journals in fields like educational research. And it's every 10 years, I don't have any idea what the proportional gain is, but as I look at it year by year, 10 years at a clip, it just looks like it's burgeoning. And new specializations and subspecializations are coming along. What other sources would you call categories of database? So far we've talked about what? Let's review. Huh? Archival, which may not be published. Maybe just, the collected letters of Robert Louis Stevenson, or, Wheaton's massive stuff from, what's his name?
C.S. Lewis?
C.S. Lewis, yeah. Letters to his Aunt Maud and stuff like that, you know. C.S. Lewis probably didn't do his best work in his letters to Aunt Maud. You know, I think you go other places for the best work of it. Archived stuff is a whale of a time consumer and isn't necessarily good as a doctoral dissertation base. So then we've looked at archival, we've looked at juried journals. We've talked in general about the field as a whole, all the accumulated literature of the field. What is another important database?
Human resources would be a database.
Can you be a little more specific? I think you're on to something there, but let's make sure.
Particular databases found within that broad category of human resources.
Where do I look for that?
Specific databases,
Yeah,
Cyclid.
that won't be juried. I'm not sure how that differs from what we've already talked about.
Human resource area files.
That's nothing but an index system. Human area resource files are a system of compilation, basically an indexing system. No, you're. Let's get away from literature for a moment. A database doesn't have to be literature.
What about specialists in the field?
Hey, now he's talking. Contemporary specialists in a field. Is that a database?
I would think so.
If that isn't a database, then most of us waste our money when we go to conferences. Because what do we do at conferences? We do two kinds of things that relate to specialized contemporary work. One, we listen to people make speeches, some of whom may know what they're talking about. And then we also talk to people in halls and in small meetings, and we try to find out who's doing what and what are we finding from it, and that is really drawing on a database. So, well, I'll just sit back and wait till he's written that stuff up, and then I'll get it after it's been juried. Now, what does that entail? Time, thank you. 3 to 5 years, which guarantees that you will be about 3 to 5 years behind in your field, which is great unless you're trying to build a career there. That's why many of us go to conferences in order to be out at the edge, because we're just not willing to wait that long to catch up. Okay, and that's a database. That's a database. Now, that's a database built on expertise in the same way that juried journals are built on expertise, right? Now, let's talk a little bit about other human databases. And don't worry yourself so much about the expertise issue for a moment. Let me put myself in the field of public health for a moment, just to see if you get the point. I'm a public health researcher for the moment, and I am concerned about the incidence of, let's say, tuberculosis in the state of Illinois. Now, granted, I'm going to want to read up on the archival stuff and on historical stuff and see what the books have said about this, but I think there's something going on today that hasn't been written up yet. I think it's, there's some changes going on. I got to understand. Now, what would I do for a database? To answer the question of what's going on now, what would I do for a database? I'm concerned about tuberculosis in Illinois. What would I do for a database? Go to the hospital. All right, I would go to contemporary institutional records. Contemporary institutional records. And it's not reasonable to call that archival because they haven't put it in the basement yet. Do you know that in medicine today, a great deal of the research that is done on almost any disease mechanism of the moment starts with case files? Case files. That's tricky stuff because you have to get permission to get into those case files. And that's where the whole question of privacy comes in and a lot of other stuff comes in. And that's one reason why there's such bickering today about whether or not you give out information like that, because the researchers are saying we can't deal with the thing unless we have the data. And if you're telling us as bureaucrats that we can't have the data, then how are we going to do the research? All right, what else in addition to institutional records? You're going to see a pattern here pretty soon as you wake up to it.
You could go to the people.
You saw the pattern. You saw the pattern. I'm glad I warned you just in time. He's going to go to the people. But when he goes to the people, what's he going to do?
Have people.
Oh, he's going to have to know how to do interviewing. He's going to have to know how to do interviewing. Now, one of the sure ways to do interviewing well, of course, is to tell somebody what answer you want. Now, I'm studying tuberculosis, and I'm just hoping that I'll find somebody this afternoon who's got tuberculosis. Now, let me say in your case, for example, you have a cough. Yeah, you have a cough, okay. You have a low-grade fever. Yeah, okay. Is it possible you might have tuberculosis? I think so. Put in that. Yes. Great interviewing technique, right? Great interviewing technique. Now, as a matter of fact, that is so obviously bad that most of us can hear it and say, I would never do anything like that. How many of you think you just might end up doing something like that? How many of you think you just might end up doing something like that? Because you don't know any better. And the answer is all of you. I do it myself. We all have ways of telegraphing the answers we want because we're not skilled enough to carry on a conversation without tipping our hand as to what I want you to say. Now let me tell you something. Americans, in general, are very likely to detect the answer you want and avoid giving it to you, which makes Americans difficult to interview because they will avoid fulfilling your hypothesis. Do you suppose you have tuberculosis? No, I don't think so. I think I just have a bad cold. I've had this bad cold for about 4 years now. But there are other cultures in the world, and some of them are represented in this room, where if I look like an authority figure, and I look like I'm a little older, or a little better trained, a little more educated, and dress a little better, I say, you suppose you might have tuberculosis? The person will say, I'm sure I do. Now that's a fact. And that's one reason why interviewing in some cultures carries one kind of difficulty, in another culture it takes another kind of difficulty, but interviewing is always some kind of interaction with the cultural biases of the people you're dealing with. And let me tell you, you can go into your communities and find it very difficult for people to be honest. Is that true? Now, what are the inhibitions, what are the barriers to honesty for people you might be interviewing in your culture?
It's hard to tell. It depends on the kind of people that you are showing. It's a trust level. It's involved. In which sense that if they see that they will be more open, if they see that you care for them, that you're there for their interest and not just to get something for your own interest, they will be more sincere and honest with you. But if they see that if you present yourself as being there for your own interest, they will play along with you, kind of go along.
Play along with you. Give you answers that are cooperative, right? There are two kinds of problems that exist in most every culture. They just exist in different forms. One of them is the desire to please, and the other is the desire to hide. The desire to please and the desire to hide. Now, if you build up a real positive relationship and you're showing a lot of trust, what are you apt to walk into? The desire to
Please.
Yes. Desire to please. Now, the way you see that expressed will vary by culture, but in many cultures, the desire to please will cause people to very shrewdly find out what you're really interested in and start giving you answers that relate to your interests. And sometimes that's not what you really want. You know, I don't want you to say a certain thing. I want you to tell me what's true. But sometimes after you get a person down that road of trust a little bit, and then you say, oh, no, come on, be honest about this. Then they think it's an attack, and then they want to hide. And when people hide, then what do? They either won't give you information, or, worse yet, they'll give you false information, any kind of information that will end it all and get you to a new subject. Now, that's one of the problems associated with interviewing, and that's one of the reasons why we have to learn to interview. Now, let's take databases wherein that might be important in your work. How many of you in here are in the international, intercultural area, and you're going to be doing much or most of your work cross-cultural lines? Let me see your hands. I didn't ask you what degree you're in. I'm just asking what kind of work you do. How many of you are dealing primarily in a monocultural situation and you're not apt to be working on cross-cultural lines? Let me see your hands. You got to put your hand up one time or the other. Is that your culture is Korea. Yeah, and so you're going to work only with Koreans. But unlike many Koreans, you have had an education in the West. And you have a lot of Western ways, and in many respects, since you speak English, you are a foreign. You don't think you're going to have intercultural problems to deal with, huh?
I'm going to work campus ministry.
Campus ministry in the United States?
Yeah.
With Korean Americans?
Korea.
Oh, with Koreans.
Yeah.
Okay. My hunch is that you're up against some intercultural problems by virtue of having your education in the United States, but that's... You'll have to answer that later. Most of us are going to be dealing with intercultural problems of one sort or another, but in terms of this question, some of you are thinking primarily in terms of a monocultural setting. Okay, fine. Now, what are you apt to run into in your areas of interest when it comes to the need for databases? What other kinds of databases are you going to need than we've talked about so far, or specialized versions of what we've talked about so far? Some of you are going to do a dissertation. Most of you are going to do a dissertation. You're going to be thinking about databases. What are some of the other databases you're going to be needing to draw on?
Participant observation.
Pardon?
Participant observation.
Participant observation is a technique, but what are you driving at?
That's we actually participate in what kind of entering into the culture to
All right.
learn from to learn their ways, maybe interview people that are in that culture, that are experts in that culture.
Yeah, I'm still not getting you far enough away from the technique, but I think there's a point there. Let me see if I can bring out the point. There are some kinds of things that we learn by doing things with people rather than asking about them. There are some kinds of things we learn about what's going on by getting in there and participating, not necessarily by questioning. Some people read the term participant observer and assume that the participant part is simply the cover. It gives you the right to be there, and then you're going to be an interviewer. But a participant observer, it means something different entirely. What does it focus on? It doesn't focus on the interview. It focuses on the observer. You're going to see things, you're going to experience things, you're going to see things in a different way because you're taking part in it. Some of you in your lives in the last 2 weeks have engaged in some things where you've learned some things by doing something alongside somebody who knew a lot more about that than you did. And you learned something by being there. Can you think of such a circumstance? Just my last two. This is very close to what I'm driving at. There are times when we can do things with people, hence participatory. And by keeping your eyes open and our ears, we're going to learn some things that we hadn't even intended to learn. Right? Whenever I hear that somebody's going to use participant observation as his technique or as his method, I'm always a little bit uneasy that the person might not understand participant observation. Because if you mean it only as a method, it presumes that you can decide what experience, what situation, and what you want to learn, and you can get it to happen. Well, the very idea of participant means that unless it happens to be happening, it's not going to happen. Oh, I can get them to talk about it. Okay, well, that's interviewing. There's nothing wrong with directed interviewing. I'd like to hear your opinion about ugali. Hey, yeah, right? Sticky stuff, right? Do you make it runny and thin, or do you make it solid?
Depending on where.
Depending on what. See, now I can learn something by interviewing this one. Okay.
But then it's the observation, is it something that's necessarily intentional?
Yes.
It is intentional, but you're not necessarily sure.
All observation in a research is intention. My problem is that if I say I'm going to be a participant observer,
Okay.
it's very hard to specify what it is I'm going to observe.
So in that, you know that you're going to observe, but you don't necessarily know the outcome of it. or
I don't
what you're
even know
gonna
the
learn.
topics of it.
But
if
it's
I'm a
just those
participant
things
observer.
that you glean out of it
Right.
by just going in to see what you.
Right. Now, that's one reason why I say don't throw the word participant onto observe unless you're sure you know what you're doing, because that's a limitation. Because a participant observer does not lead the situation. The participant observer is simply in the situation to learn what can be learned. Now, most of us, when we're doing relatively short research, as unfortunately most dissertation research is based on short things, you really don't have the time and the meritorious quality characteristics to do good participant observation. Am I coming across? Okay. But my point is this, that experiences with people are a database. Experiences with people are a database. Conversations with people give us access to a database. Observations in general give us access to a database. Databases then are not all books, they're not all words, they're not all statements. What's the difference? The big difference between an observation and an interview. The big difference. Good. One's more visual, one's more verbal. Exactly. Exactly. Do you need both, or do you need one or the other, or how do you judge that? Depends on what you're looking for. It depends on the database you're trying to access. Now, if I'm trying to access the database, what do these people do in their youth meetings in this church? What database would likely give you most reliable and most valid information?
Observation.
Oh, you're really catching on there, aren't you? Now, why did you make that discrimination so vigorously? What do you suspect?
They'll interpret what they do. They'll filter it if you talk to them on them.
So, reliability, an answer that can be gotten again and again and again, not just whimsically at this moment it says one thing, another says unreliable, and valid, it is what it says it is, is probably going to come from things you can observe, see. Most of us tend to trust our eyes a lot more than we trust what we're hearing, especially when what we're hearing is not a natural sound, but the creation of another mind. A verbal answer is not a natural sound. Wind is a natural sound. A brick hitting the ground is a natural sound. But the minute I ask a question, veil, it says on your shirt. Did you enjoy veil?
Yes.
Now, I heard yes. Is that a natural sound? Did you hear veil coming through that? What did I hear?
Affirmation.
Huh?
An affirmation.
She's affirming something about veil, but I'm not sure what. Now, I like to know that. I'm not going to say I'm not interested in what you say about it. But the point is that I haven't seen you in veil yet. Now I can't. You're not there anymore. But I've got to rely on that. But the point is, I have a little more willingness to trust what I can actually see. All right, now there's another problem. How many of you tend to trust what you can see? The answer is, we just said it. We all tend to trust more what we can see. Are you sure you're seeing it right? There's the rub. Are you sure you're seeing the meaning? All these people have been sitting in the same chairs for 4 hours. They wiggle a lot. Some of them actually look like they're trying to get up, but they all stay right there. 4 hours. I have been watching them. A group a lot like this, and they haven't gotten out of their chairs for 4 straight hours. I would think they would be terribly uncomfortable for a variety of reasons. This group shows great dedication. This group shows great concentration. This group shows great willingness to avoid ripping their pants because they're glued to the chairs because some clown came in and put cement on the chairs. But I don't see that. You follow me?
Yes.
I may see without seeing. I may go away and describe what I saw with my eyes and be dead wrong. These people are totally disinterested. But they're all too embarrassed to say, my pants are stuck. I can't get up. And if you ever had that experience with a lot of people in concert, it's interesting to notice that it takes a while for people to begin to admit that to one another. Do you have glue on your chair? I mean, you can imagine this. My skirt's completely stuck down. And what about yours? I can't get up. Yeah, that's a visualizable situation, right? But it illustrates what I'm saying. Sometimes what we see, if it causes us then to make judgments, is going to be just as unreliable as what we hear. What's the solution? Huh? Come.
No, I passed.
You passed. I'm not sure of that.
More than one observation, you're looking for a pattern?
Good. More than one observation. That's one of the parts to the solution. More than one observation. All right. Let's start creating then a design that'll begin to get rid of some of these potential errors. All right. Get more than one observation.
I think it's also in a way timing too. For example, you measure many times, but most of the time in the daytime. Actually, the thing happens at night time, so you have to measure the right timing to catch that specific.
Okay, so we need to be aware of the differences in pattern of a life and what part we're looking at. What else helps?
Do you want to interview as well?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's one of the keys.
To do both.
Explain that a little more thoroughly.
Well, you can hopefully ask questions in a way to see if they're going to respond to collaborate with what you've observed, or if it's going to be different.
To put it in the most simple language, observations followed by interviews are stronger than observations not followed by interviews. Conversely, observations that are accompanied by, or interviews that are accompanied by observations are going to be more easy to interpret carefully and well than interviews with no observation. Now, what does that suggest about the relative value of observation and interviews? Which is more important? And that's a dumb question.
I have a question.
Wait a minute, stick with me. I just admitted that's a dumb question. Why is it a dumb question?
They're codependent.
They ought to be. They ought to be. Many times they're not put together that way, but they're going to be each buttressed by the other. So when we do ethnology, ethnographic data gathering, which are we going to emphasize?
Both.
Thank you. Another dumb question. We're going to emphasize both. Now, do you always start with one and then go to the other? That's a yes or no question. You always start with one and then go to the other.
You cannot do both at the same time. Though.
Rarely can you do them both well at the same time, but
You have to begin with one.
and not necessarily the same one. It'll depend a lot on the strategy you're using for your inquiry. But that's part of your design question. How do you design this? In general, from a social graces point of view, is it easier to start an encounter with an observation or an interview?
Observation.
Observation.
Why do you say that?
Because if you start with interview, there is the possibility that the person might make up the observation, or rather present something that they want you to see.
It's less intrusive.
Which is?
Observation. Well, I guess it could be intrusive, but I mean to.
I'm so glad you're alert.
But I mean,
Hear ourselves.
if-
Does it follow that it is more, you know, if I walked into this class, especially if I walked in 30 minutes late and sat quietly in the corner and then walked out 30 minutes early, is that more or less intrusive than if I come in here and do some interviewing? Well, it depends on the total flow of the situation, right? But now consider from a human relations point of view. Think of it in a one-on-one. Are you comfortable with somebody coming in and watching you without your having any idea what's going on? Most of us are not. So really, there isn't an ideal answer to that one either. But most of us are better off if we can communicate orally, early, so as to resolve some of the anxieties that otherwise will occur. My own recommendation is that unless you have a good reason not to, start with some kind of interaction, verbal interaction. Whether it is your detailed interviewing or not, that's the secret. It doesn't follow that you need to dump the interview in a formal way. Boom, right off the bat. Now this is where participant observation usually takes care of itself, because you're just in there as a participant. What are we going to be doing in this course? We're going to be learning how to do interviewing a little bit better, and we're doing observation a little bit better, and we're going to work on these separately, and then we're going to work on them in terms of how they interact, and we're going to try some examples of each. But skills of interviewing can be separated from skills of observation. And since we're dealing with skills in here, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to do some practicing of observation and some practicing of interviewing. And as you've seen from the agenda of work, it's going to show up. But it doesn't follow that that means that you're necessarily going to do A, then B in all such cases. We're going to start somewhere because we can't start everywhere. But that's not to be seen as a pattern of must. It's just a matter of several sets of skills. Okay, I've tried to give you a foundation in terms of databases and in terms of the relationship of inquiry. Let me end this part up with just a little bit of a connection between all this and the research task itself. Then I'm going to open the floor for questions and observations and comments on your part, more than you have so far. Why do we emphasize research in a profession? Why do we emphasize research in a profession? And one of the symptoms of this emphasis is that the higher the education of the persons in that profession, the more apt we are to emphasize research. And you people have voluntarily submitted yourselves to the highest academic status within the fields represented in this room, and now you find yourself necessarily dealing with research. Now, what lies behind that? What assumptions? Is that just habit, or is there some logic? How does research relate to the doing of a profession?
Change, you should say. What would be the cutting edge of the profession? The changing.
Okay. And when you use the word change in that sentence there, what kinds of things were you thinking about? Change means what?
The field of education, different types of curriculum, different methodologies, different ways of viewing groups to be educated, changing the way education is done in different settings.
I'm thinking of improvement.
Various kinds of improvement. She introduces the word change, you introduce the word improvement. You can't do much improvement unless you're willing to do change, but change doesn't necessarily have to be improvement, so it takes the two together. Good, all right. Let me ask you an epistemological question. Are there things that aren't already known? Are there things that are not already known? Yes or no? Are there things that are not already known? What's your opinion? Well, let's go over here and ask things that are not already known. Lots of things that are not already known. For heaven's sakes, why would we be here if that weren't true? Not only for us individually, but for the field and for humankind in general. Lots of things that are not already known. How in the world will they ever become known? Somebody is going to have to go out and how do you find things out? And when you're searching, what is it that hangs over the top of your head? And it has a funny shape to it.
Question mark.
It's a question mark. Right? Now then, the farther along you go in any professional field, the more important is that question mark. And the people at the top of every professional field not only have a clear, flashing question mark, but they have a whole body of skills that deal with how do you ask those questions and how do you find those answers. That body of human behavior we call inquiry. It is our commitment as a faculty in this institution to the PhDs in intercultural studies and educational studies. It is our commitment to help you build the competencies of inquiry, on the presumption that you already don't know everything that needs to be known. And through your life, you never will. But if your life is going to be significant in terms of professional competencies, you're going to have to carry that question mark and keep it shined. Develop the skills of inquiry and use them. You're going to have to be an effective learner over a long period of time. Now that differs from some people's view of epistemology. The reason you go to school is what? So you will know. Thank you. That epistemology is pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. But it motivates many of the schools of this world. You go to school so that you can know. By the time you come into a competent doctoral program, you have a different notion of why you're there. You're not here so that you will leave knowing. You are here so that you will leave asking, searching, but doing so with skills and understanding. Not just by coincidence and accident will you discover. Right? Does that make sense? What do you think this course is all about? The very heart of that process. Now, you may get the impression that I believe this is a terribly important course. And you would be right. However, I believe something else. I believe that ultimately, if you're going to be a really exciting professional person, you're going to do most of your inquiry for the fun of it. You're going to do most of your inquiry for the fun of it. And after this rather sober start, I'm going to dedicate myself this week to helping you develop the competencies that will give you as quickly as possible a sense of the fun of inquiry, the fun of interviewing, the fun of observation, the fun of inference drawing, the fun of hypothesis making. It's a way of life. It's a way of life. And I think ultimately it's a godly way of life. Now, most of us with Christian presuppositions, biblical beliefs, would argue, even as our sister cites the proof text, there's nothing new. But I haven't seen it all yet. There's nothing new. But I don't know it all yet. There's nothing. Huh? What'd you say?
I have to clarify myself.
Do it.
It's nothing new, but we have to look for it because we are blind.
Good. That's right. Because in terms of the human task, our task is more a matter of discovery than it is of invention. You don't have to invent a rabbit, by the way. That was already done in creation. We don't have to invent rabbits. We don't have to invent motorboats. That's already been done. A lot of things have been done in creation or in 20th century technology. A lot of things have been done. But what we don't know yet is what are the things that we haven't yet invented. And those are in the realm of discovery, and those are in the realm of fruits of inquiry. Does that make sense? Okay, let me throw it to you now. What are some of the things that have dawned on you that you say, I wish we'd talk a moment about so-and-so, and let me check so-and-so. Anybody got anything in the way of